So thank you very much indeed for coming again to see us. And I think last time we met with two of your colleagues, and we've had an oral hearing previously. And at that time you told us some of the problems that you face getting a full removal of mesh, and the same issue that has been faced by many other women as well. Including, I think, Fiona Bicknell, who accompanied you last time. She told us a lot about that. But since that last oral hearing, we've had lots of correspondence from you, and thank you very much for that. And in that you were telling us about your concern that there could be a link with mesh insertion and squamous cell carcinoma, and I think you went into that in some detail, which was interesting and helpful for us. And of course the advantages of a database and a registry, and also you mentioned concerns about the private sector. So we've had that from you, and as I said, that's been very helpful to us. But also we've been thinking a lot about patients as we've been travelling around the country. And you will know that we started off with patient groups, listening to them. And this time, of course, it's about the insertion of surgical mesh. But this is a different session in that it's your opportunity to think about things that we should be highlighting in our report. Because we're coming to the end of our fact-finding sessions. They're drawing to a close, but we thought it right that we should give patients the opportunity to come back again. Some we know have been looking at the website, seeing the interviews we've had with other people. And so if there are particular issues you'd like us to consider, we would welcome that today, or anything generally you'd like us to consider before we write our report. So I hope that's clear.
Yes.
And if perhaps we could start with you saying who you are and what you represent, so that it's on the camera.
My name's Mary McLaughlin. I am the founder of Mesh Ireland. I describe it as a one-woman campaign. It has gathered followers. And maybe some clarifications which are helpful to how I've analysed the evidence that I've looked at. I have a laws master's degree in corporate governance and public policy, so I noted a lot of model discussions in the evidence, and I have a politics master's degree in legislative studies and practice, so I am also interested in how this review will progress the plight of the mesh injured. And I'm an interrupted PhD on access to civil justice and capability of lay persons. So that has fueled my approach to looking into my experiences and that of other women. I've accessed mesh services in the Belfast Trust, in England and in the USA, and I had all my children in Germany, so I've had quite an international reproductive pathway and post-reproductive pathway, which informs my views as well. I do know Mr. Obolensky from FEG. He used to be a colleague of my ex-husband. I just declare that. It was strange to see him in the evidence session. Fundamental remit of the review. You have pointed out to me that the review wants to look at the healthcare system in England and how England responds to the problems. And one of the key points is, of course, that what happens in England cascades down and flows upwards. So it has great relevance not only for the devolved administrations, but it also has great relevance for the global mesh communities in the other countries looking at reform. So the eyes of the world at the minute are on the Cumberland Review. So I looked at the evidence and thought I'd take it from an issues-based, and at the end of watching all the many hours, I'd like to thank people for coming and giving their evidence. I know it's not easy, and people get nervous like myself, and it's not a perfect situation, but at the end of it I thought, so how does this shift, how will this review shift the burden from the patient back into the system? because no system's perfect, and people have spoken about imperfections and flaws, but there was also a note of nobody seemed to be responsible, be it for the form that they're working in, if they're professional bodies, that they just respond to professional bodies. And women don't understand that. Women don't understand how nobody can really be accountable, and I know this is what the panel is here to address. A lot has happened since we've been here. Mesh Ireland and the women that I speak to are very glad to hear of the continued ban, and I note that it's going to take a year or 2 years to get the registry commissioned and up, so that is very helpful. And in Northern Ireland, the chair of the All-Party Mesh Group, Leah Flynn from Sinn Féin, handed in a letter of concern to the Human Rights Commission. I know we haven't spoken about human rights, but there is a general conversation with any mesh woman will say that they feel as if they're being discriminated against, that they're discriminated against because they're older, because they're non-reproductive, because their presumption that the loss of their intimacy is not such a bad thing because they're not reproductive. And the impact of mesh is that certain groups of women are created and that they have a very hard ride for the rest of their lives potentially, be it in the benefit system, be it in the healthcare system. If everything is going to be who can pay for their health is going to get seen first, then that is very difficult. The disingenuity at NICE, I think NICE downplayed their significance and that they're non-mandatory to follow their guidelines, because of course NICE is something that the courts use to determine whether a doctor is kept to the standard of care. So it might be a policy-based thing, but for the women going to court, if the doctor has kept their NICE standards, the doctor is going to rely on that, and therefore it's a bit disingenuous to disconnect the two and say they're not, it has no consequence. Ethics and informed consent, I'm still not convinced that the doctors have the best ethics. I'm not saying that it's when you watch the videos it comes across as if, yeah, they know they dropped the ball, they know this has happened, but moving forward we'll collect data, and for the women who are injured it still comes across slightly disrespectful or blasé. You're a statistic, and there has to be a difference between being objective and being sensitive to the people watching. I know a lot of people get angry when they watch the medical professionals giving evidence, and it's because they feel that they're being disrespected again, even if that is unintentional. And then the chilling effect of litigation, I'd like to speak something about that. In that, I know it's outside the remit of the panel to discuss people's access to justice in the civil courts. However, because everything in the system works as a defence for the medical profession when you go to court, the medical records they create work as a defence for them. Nobody cares what's on an informed consent form until something goes wrong. It's like the packet of guaranteed instructions in anything. If it goes right, nobody goes back to that document. If it goes wrong, people go back to the documents and start looking very carefully what is in it. So the women, I'm still seeing this, that women are very dissatisfied with their medical records, and there is a feeling amongst the women that the medical records are being written with the prospective view that they might be used in court. And we all know that doctors get medical legal training and writing reports. And one of the things that you notice is that if you, it's usually the mesh entry, usually patient feels. Patient feels her mobility is affected. Patient feels she has pain in her pelvis. Patient feels. So it's a very weak formulation of what is real. and it reinforces to the women that they're not being taken seriously. And when they do try to access civil justice and go to their lawyers, the lawyers can't do a lot with those types of medical statements. So that is something that impacts on the mesh injured women. So I'm really glad about the pause, but for the women who are already injured, there are a lot of things that we hope the system can maybe help us with, and I will give some suggestions or recommendations. Standard of care, again, NICE and the GMC have a great role to play there. Patient registration, representation and PPG. I came across this PPG model where it says that there's patient participation groups, that the patient voice has to be represented but not necessarily by the patient. And I've noticed this has happened in Scotland where they formed subgroups now, and the patient voice is being represented by doctors. Now, we're not damning all doctors, we need them, they need us. But I do think, given the mesh crisis, that the application of this existing model in the system is inappropriate, because there will be no trust built to mesh or the mesh injured if they're subbed in a committee by a doctor. And then the question will be which doctor subs the patient group, and we all are aware of patient preferences for particular doctors. So I don't think, although that's an existing model, I think that should be disapplied in the case of any mesh patient groups. And the MHRA and adverse incident reporting. I wasn't going to talk about the MHRA because I know the panel has grasped that, but I did send up a document today, and it was, in 2017 I followed the route to the very end with the MHRA to this responding. And the document was that on, I understand that they look at a batch number, and they see if there's a problem with the batch, and then they check whether anybody else has reported a problem with that batch. But on section 11 of the page it says, are there any similar reported incidents? So for example, if somebody reported pain, and then it doesn't say in the batch, it says in the product, and then there's a list of so many countries. And I got it back, and the thing wasn't ticked for yes or no whether there was similar incident reported according to the product and not the batch. So not a manufacturing defect, but the product. And then it said how many, and it said 0. And then you've all the countries in the world where all this mesh litigation is going on, and they're reporting back. And we did. I have to acknowledge Mr. Sargent from the Northern Ireland Adverse Incident Centre. He corresponded very thoroughly and reminded them of their duty of candour, and it went cold. Correspondence went cold. So I think that that form has been filled out incorrectly, and perhaps the MHRA could follow up and see if they have reports according to the country and not a manufacturing defect but a patient injury, because if they have those type of reports, we might be able to see some stats. I know you're all keen on stats. So I'm going to do my recommendations first because I'm not good at time management, so I want to make sure I put them in. I heard lots of evidence on transobturator tape. I look at mine in the picture and think, thank goodness it's out. And
sorry, Mary, can you go quite slowly and quite loudly?
Okay.
Because these recommendations are really important to us, and I don't want to miss anything. Okay,
the first recommendation I have is that the transobturator tape is immediately banned, and that an information sheet has to go out to the GPs and public bodies. The ban, I didn't hear any evidence in favour of the transobturator tape. I heard surgeons who said they never inserted it because they thought it was dangerous, and there's evidence that the system has rejected the transobturator tape, and when they realised there was problems with it, they started to go back to the TBTs. So I don't think there's any mesh surgeons particularly attached to the transobturator tape, and I think it would be good for the women who have been damaged by it Do you know it's banned? Just like the pelvic prolapse meshes are banned. The information sheet to GPs and public bodies, I have encountered personally the problem that people that we interact with on a lower system don't understand the impact of the transobturator mesh on mobility, for example. So they just don't know how it affects, and it's not surprising when we have surgeons coming in and say that they didn't really link mobility to a transobturator tape injury. So we need some type of public information sheet that outlines for the relevant body the information they need to know, and also if somebody is going, for example, to a benefits tribunal, that they can provide a government information sheet about the injury. I'm also aware that the benefits department haven't trained their assessors up on this thing, so I think an information sheet, a detailed information sheet, would be very beneficial and help women who are left with injury, that they don't have to try and explain it themselves, because it's quite complex.
So is this an information list to patients who be damaged as opposed to an information list which would be part of the consent process?
Well, I would say that somebody needs to sit down and write a very detailed information booklet on transobturator damage. And then people who need it can tailor the source document down to the needs and the audience that is for. But at the moment, women are just trying to lift stuff themselves off the internet, and it's not really working. International and independent advisory body.
Can I just ask then about this information sheet? It's clearly different from the NICE evidence that's been put out.
Yes.
The NICE information that's been put out to patients. Yours, as you have said to Cyril, is about damaged patients.
It's about how mesh affects the functionality in the day-to-day activities and making a journey, for example, which are frameworks. There are different frameworks where the evidence isn't about, it's not enough to say it causes pelvic pain. It has to be a little bit more that somebody can deduce how that impacts you on a day-to-day. And at the minute we don't really have anything, and because mesh women haven't been believed on mobility, then you as a patient are trying to tell somebody who's administering public funds that you can't walk, and they can see you can walk.
So are you suggesting who should do that? You said the government, but that's a bit wide.
Well, maybe a leading mesh surgeon could write up a document and give it into the Department of Health to say how a mesh tape in your hips affects how you walk.
Not just the Department of Health, from what you said, it's the Department of Work and Pensions.
Oh, the Department of Work. Well, somebody in the government could maybe commission a leading medical expert to write a document to make it clear, and then that cascade down to the relevant departments.
Do you think
that's what I'm saying.
I mean, you're thinking this specifically around for TOT.
Yes, yeah.
But do you think there's a case for doing this for other forms of mesh as well?
Absolutely. That the women don't have to. We have to shift the burden back to the system. The system has failed them. We've carried the burden too long. We're all tired. We need the system to kick into place. It's there. It's just not been activated properly. So that was my main thing. So the media ban of transobturator tape and information disseminated to the relevant public bodies, maybe formulated by an expert. The next thing is the monitoring of mesh removals. I was pleased to see that the panel invited mesh centre clinicians, and there was a large discussion after the Mesh Ireland session about mesh removal, and I would like to thank the panel for doing that. And so where do we go from here? There seems to be, the mesh myths seem to have been busted about shrinkage and splittering in most cases and things like that, so that's very good. And then there's going to be specialist centres commissioned, and the feeling is that who's going to monitor the specialists? Because as you've heard many times, they haven't been doing a lot of specialist removal, and the skill the skill and the competency of complex mesh removal is not won overnight. So I thought long and hard about this, and I thought, how can we gain mesh patients' confidence and trust in the system back again? And there is a great distrust in the UK, and I know some of the UK surgeons are working very hard to rebuild that trust. But
sorry, can I go back to the other one about monitoring the specialists?
Yeah.
Who are you suggesting should do that?
I'm suggesting that the UK should reach out on a global basis, and I'm suggesting it because there's lots of committees around the world, government committees looking at the same problems, and as one closes down, another one starts up. And the women locally, as a country or national as well, do not have trust in their national systems, and also because of the litigation and things that are going on in the background, there's a conspiracy theory to be proven or disproven in the minds of the patients. So if there's several large countries that have this same problem, and it's going through several governments, and people like yourself are looking into this, and people coming out and giving evidence, would it not make sense that each country designates a specialist, and that specialist can go out once or twice a year to the other country and monitor the standards of surgeons in another country, so that the patients have the feeling that it's not the same people, it's not the surgeon that injured them is now in charge of monitoring mesh removal, and then that the medical community in that country know that it's an international independent person. They're coming in and they're going out. They're not.
There are a number of international organisations, cover specialities.
Yes.
I was president once of the International Paediatric Nephrology Association. I know obstetricians and gynecologists have world congresses, and there are structures around this. So you're suggesting that a body that is in this area might take a responsibility for overseeing on a worldwide basis this problem, but they are very much professionally dominated.
Yes.
Which is perhaps not quite what you're talking about.
Well, it's an idea. It's an idea, a seed that I'll put out there. I mean, I think we have to accept that we have to work with the medical community, and we have to build trust again. I mean, I don't know if you put an international expert and two designated patient representatives that can look at the pictures of the mesh removal. We've heard now that the pictures are going to be done, and people are going to get pictures of the removed mesh and measured, and pathology reports are going to be done. So the medical community seem accepting that patients need to see more evidence. And if they don't trust the doctors in their own country, then they're more likely to trust somebody who comes in and isn't dependent on that medical community for their own career. I know everybody networks globally, but I mean, we can't bring somebody in from outer space to do these things, so we have to sort of start moving forward. And if patient representation is on it, then that is maybe a way forward, because it cannot be that the mesh advocacy groups advance one surgeon, their favourite surgeon. It's creating problems already. So I think there has to be some type of bigger model, and it's a sustainability thing as well, because then a country that's further ahead in the mesh crisis, they can share information with countries who are only starting to recognise and address it, and I think that's a sustainable way to healthcare. So that was my third recommendation, was that the GCM, the General Medical Council, set up a dedicated investigation team. I looked into their models, and I see they do a one incident follow-up. If a doctor has a one incident, that they follow up and see if they don't have to formalise the process so far, if there's some remedial thing can be taking place. However, the GMC doesn't serve the patients very well. I've interacted with them a lot, and you've got the data privacy thing going on. You've got limited, sometimes it's like a call centre type conversation you have. You can see people are reading from a script. And for patients who have concerns about individual doctors, I noted the gentleman from the GMC said, we can get in touch with him, and I think, no, he has to get in touch with us in that he has to set up some service. That if women think that a particular surgeon has harmed them, and it's a matter for the GMC have to set up a dedicated mesh team, because some of these surgeons are doing a lot of operations, and within groups we have women who are injured by the same person. It would make sense for the GMC to see if it is one-off incident with that patient, but whether there's other patients that have had the same incident. And I think they would then be able to evaluate that better without having to discuss things that go into the data problem of sharing it with the patient. And I think that's what they're paid for. I mean, a lot of these public bodies are beginning to look like the moment like they're people earning a lot of money, and when you need them, they're not stepping up. So that would be my suggestion, how they could step up to let patients give in their complaint and then see if it's investigatable or whether it's not, and then they can gather themselves whether there's complaints being made about a doctor frequently, and whether that needs to be flagged up not only to their tribunals but also to hospitals, because there's a 20-year history of putting these tapes in. There's a lot of women have been impacted. My fourth recommendation is the expanded scope of commissioned services.
Before you go on to that,
yes.
Can I just ask you about the GMC and the investigation and all of that? Can you just say a bit more about that? Because I want to be sure that that's within the remit of the GMC.
Yeah. If I take the example that I have, I've given you an example of my own pathway, and I feel aggrieved by that. I know that there's probably, I don't know, I assume that there'll be other women who are aggrieved by the same problem, and maybe the same surgeon, maybe a different surgeon with the same problem. And at the minute, the only place that is filtering down to will be the court system. And that will go on the capability of a woman to fund litigation. So if the system is interested in addressing the flaws, there has to be a free at service or free at entry body that allows people who can't afford litigation and who don't want to litigate, but to be able to flag up the dangers. So why can the GMC not get resources if they don't already have it? I suppose it's not a mediation type of thing, but the GMC advanced the tribunal, the disciplinary tribunal, so it's not the woman that has to pay for that. And that they can see whether these are serious things that a good practitioner should not have been doing. And then also they can highlight to a woman if the woman is incorrect and the doctor hasn't done anything wrong, because I think it's important to not waste the rest of your life running down rabbit holes that nobody's going to listen to. So it was my idea of letting the women feel a form of redress, that their individual complaint can be heard outside of the hospital system, because the hospital complaint system is just appalling. It is appalling. It is a paper production of cut and paste paragraphs which say we have looked at ourselves, we've done some navel gazing, and we have decided there's no grounds for your complaint. Or would you like to come and talk to us? And then women are finding out that there's been recordings made of their telephone calls, and there's already evidence being gathered and reports written. If you then end up doing a subject access request, you can see how there's documents building up. Women don't want to complain to the hospitals. I've stopped complaining a long time ago. I've just given up on it. So I think it should come out of the Health Trust, because the Health Trust, again, it's a chilling effect of litigation. The Health Trust know that this could be a potential thing for their legal department.
So you don't think the PAL system works?
Is that the complaint system in the
Well,
hospitals?
it's the advisory liaison service.
No,
Patient advisory liaison service.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've lost track of the number of complaints.
Because it was set up for that purpose.
Yes, but I think it doesn't work in the case of a potential mesh litigant. I mean, our records are flagged. Our records are flagged that we're litigants. So everybody touching us are making sure that they're creating copious records just in case. But they're never. When people get them, and I only have several accounts. I have several accounts of people I know. When they get their records, it doesn't match the patient's encounter, the patient's memory of the encounter, and some of them are very detailed. There's lots of details that don't match what the patient said, what the patient did, who attended the meetings with them, things like that. So the patients are beginning to feel like their documents are being manufactured. Yeah. And if you're not asking for your documents, you don't know this.
You should get letters copied to you of all letters written about you. Has that not happened?
No, we get a summary. You get a summary. Dear Miss McLaughlin, we acknowledge your complaint. We have spoken to the
No, I
professionals.
meant when a doctor writes a letter to another doctor about you and your condition, you should get a copy of that.
Yes, we do. I'd like a summary letter. Patient attended, and a lot of patient feels. Patient feels there's something wrong with her bowel. Patient feels there's something wrong with her legs. Patient feels her tape is eroded. That's my letters. I'm happy to share them with you. Patient feels. So,
In
yes,
terms of what you're suggesting with GMC,
yes.
what would this provide over and above what they provide at the moment?
I think it would be from a different perspective, and that it would de-escalate the conflict that the patient has with the doctors and the trusts that they feel have let them down. So if women are going to try and heal, they can't keep being sent to the hospital and the doctors that they feel have injured them. It is traumatic. Every time you come off the phone with the people who didn't want to know about your mesh, told you it was in your head, and then when you're trying to get your health care, it's just traumatic for the women. They have to get the system has to direct them out of that conflict. It's and the doctors, the doctors and the staff, they know your names. Probably, oh no, this woman is on the phone. But who else can we phone at the minute? Who else can we talk to? There is a withdrawal of mesh population from speaking to their doctors. Maybe not every mesh woman, but a lot of women have. I mean, I will not go down. I will never go back to my trust for any gynecological. Never.
So when you've been thinking about this, which you
Yes.
clearly have in great depth, and thank you for that, have you considered the whole of the complaint system that operates in the NHS? I mean, clearly you have been thinking about the GMC.
Yes.
People have told us that the complaint system is very complicated,
Yes.
and I wondered if there were other thoughts that you'd had specifically on the complaints system as it operates now.
Well, in Northern Ireland, we have 2-year waiting lists for everything.
You have what?
2-year waiting lists to see a first referral to a consultant on most health issues, unless you have cancer. That's the only. So, the only other address is through the complaint system. So I would assume that there's trusts in England as well where they have very long waiting lists. So I would assume that the patient complaint system is overwhelmed, and that there's template documentation that they send out to patients, and that the patients get these documents often not within the 20 days or within the 40 days, often 60 days till you get a reply. And the reply is a standardised reply, and by the time you get it, you can't even remember what exactly it was you complained about. I mean, that is the reality of it. So I think because the mesh injury is very specific and it's very traumatic, that it's about surgeons implanting, it's more about surgeons implanting a device, and many patients have gone to their hospitals and their doctors have said, it's not what you think it is, it's something else. And now we've got to the stage where doctors are now saying, yes, maybe the women do have mobility problems, maybe the women do have this, maybe, the mesh needs to come out. And the mesh women want the doctors to be held accountable. They don't want to make a complaint they don't want to complain about the appointment not being good. They want to make a complaint about the doctor. And not everybody would like to sue their hospital for many reasons. So is the GMC not the body that deals with complaints specifically about their doctors? If I take my own case, which I've talked about in the previous session, if I think a doctor was going to take a scalpel to me, was going to give me anaesthetic and take a scalpel to me and do an operation that I had made quite clear I did not want, I can't process that through a complaint system in the hospital, because the hospital is maybe the phone will go to their legal department straight away. But then I'm thinking, well, if there are other doctors doing that, there are other women coming in who might end up not recognising that. And hasn't the system to respond to that? Hasn't the system to create a special? This is a crisis. It's not.
I think the GMC would say,
yes.
I think they actually said it to us, but I have to go back and check, that they do look at patterns, complaints about doctors. If you get more than one complaint, they look at that. However, your point is, well, it's not working, if that's the case.
Yeah, it's not.
And you've made a general statement right at the start, which I wrote down, shift the burden from the patient to the system.
Yes. I teach legal systems. I know systems go wrong, right. And I know panels try to put them right. But we have to move it from the patient. The patient has to be able to heal. The patient has to be looked after, given the medical services, and allowed to walk out of this mesh world and not have their life defined by mesh. And some women will have their scars, their emotional scars and their health scars for their lifetime. And I know that the remit of this committee is broad but narrow. It can't do everything. But I know that it can cascade down into other areas which will impact on the life of women when they've no more surgeries and no more consultants and they're at home living with other things that are input. That this panel and the expertise that they've heard, we've had the best in the UK coming to talk, and sometimes I've shaken my head at some of the things they've said. But it's not easy given evidence. But
Mary, I'm sorry, we've interrupted you. And I think you were into your fourth recommendation before we interrupted.
Yes, the fourth was the expanded scope of the Commission services. Expanded scope of the Commission services. So at the minute there are specialist mesh centres set up in the UK, some working better than others. However, I think the selection of services that are within those special centres has been very doctor filtered. For example, the women are not getting access to trauma counselling. There's no trauma counselling within those services. I think that should be part of it. The women are being asked to go to things like group therapy, CBT. And firstly, I don't think any woman is wanting to walk into a group therapy with random strangers to talk about what's been going on with their vagina. I just don't think that is a reasonable suggestion. However, the health workers, that's all they're able to offer, because there's no specialised counselling services within the trauma. Now, I asked for specialised services several years ago, and I have been waitlist didn't happen, and by the time they did offer me group therapy, CBT, I was already privately paying for counselling services, and when I asked for those bills to be paid, it was refused because I had gone and got them myself. So we can't wait. Sometimes we can't wait. We have suicidal women. You've heard it all the time. You've met some of the women who are and were suicidal. So you cannot wait. And then, if I've been with a therapist for a year and then asked that those bills are paid because they're a recognised therapist, they're an accredited, they've got all they're not some quack therapist down the road. The health service says, no, you're going to have to come back in and we'll have to refer you within our things, and that might take a couple of years. And then you think, but I'm in the middle of therapy, I've told something to somebody, it doesn't make sense. So again, it's if you have the economic means or not, you get the therapy, and if not, the women are getting no therapy, and you cannot heal from this if we don't get counselling services. This is traumatic. But what I'm saying is, because of the part of the body that's affected, and because of how they've been affected, I mean, a lot of us have been effectively neutered, because sexual counselling would be another thing on the expanded scope of services. There's been no sexual counselling offered for women at all. And I think it goes back to the human rights issue, that there's a perception that when you've had your children, that your intimacy is not so important, and that when you're postmenopausal, that nobody asks you about it. They just assume that, if you lose your intimacy, well, you can live with that. And I know the panel knows that's not the case, but this attitude is reflected in the current services. There is nothing to help the women apart from the women themselves. And at the minute, there is a toxicity amongst the women, and it's inevitable it's going to happen, because you're just talking to the same people all the time, because there's no professional person stopping this. So that would be expanded scope of the Commission services. I think the mental health and the sexual health area has been totally forgotten about. And also, if a MeSH woman has an emergency, are they meant to go to their A&E? I mean, is that in Northern Ireland? You could bring your sandwiches in a flask down to A&E. Are you meant to go to an A&E service and start explaining to a doctor who's never heard about MeSH what's wrong with you when you're bleeding, when you're in excruciating pain? Is there not, can we have a emergency service in these specialised centres that you're setting up, that there's a on-call system like we have for GPs? It's a very specialised ailment. If you turn up with mesh injury, I'm not sure any departments can do anything for people. Or they once they see that you're mesh injured, nobody's hands off, and you get paracetamol and sent home. So is that something you can maybe look at?
You're making quite an important point, and I just want to make sure that we've covered all
Yes.
the sort of additional services or enhanced services that you're thinking of. Have we covered all the kind of expanded services that you've got in mind?
Those were the ones that sprung to mind, because we have colorectal, we've got gynae, we've got urogynae, we have some have orthopedics in now. Can somebody? I think, but with nothing on mental health. I mean, physiotherapy. I'm not a physiotherapy fan, but if there's a role for it, I'll let somebody else deal with it. So there's physio. I know women are getting sent to physio, but on the mental health counselling, there's absolutely nothing, and sexual health, absolutely nothing. So, want to move on? So the next one is the updated medical record reflecting filtering gaps. So what I'm suggesting is that I've articulated that there's a problem with medical records. Would it not be at a time where the medical community have recognised that the women's ailments have not been correctly attributed to MeSH? would it not be at a time that every consultant that is seeing a mesh woman writes a thorough letter to the GP outlining the patient's history, the patient's complaints, why they're down to mesh, and what the GP can do to help and what they should be looking out for? And that letter is sent to the patient as well, because the patients have a better knowledge of their medical history than the doctors, and that there's some negotiation that there's a mesh patient record that's sent to the GP from the specialist, and the patient gets a copy of it, that they can agree that those are the salient points of their medical history, and that there's an acknowledgement from the medical profession that their ailments are related to. Not patient feels they're related. Patient has read on the internet about mesh. None of these statements, they have to disappear from they have to stop. Doctors are still writing, patient has read from the internet about mesh. It is disrespectful and it aggravates. I just think there has to be if the doctors are saying they haven't recognised these things, then their records from the past may not reflect the true situation of the patient. And I think patients could move forward if they knew that there was a medical record that actually reflected, that acknowledged what had happened to them and why they're in pain, that they're not hypochondriacs going back and forth to their doctor.
So are you suggesting a sort of retrospective look
Well,
at people's records, or are you
yes,
suggesting
well, yeah, not a summary of everything that has happened, but just say, at deadline X, Miss McLaughlin has presented with symptoms in keeping with mesh complications. In Miss McLaughlin's case, she has problems with her bowel, problems with her bladder, problems with her mobility, problems with her intimacy. And these have happened because it's highly likely that these have happened, probably less likely, could be other reasons. I understand there are other reasons, other gynecological conditions that can cause symptoms. I heard the doctors, I agree to a certain extent that some patients have injury and think now everything is attributable to mesh. But the patients need to know to what extent their injuries or their current situation is mesh related, and if it's not mesh related, then the patients need to know that too, because they're not being referred to other doctors to address things that are perhaps not mesh related. So there's things maybe dropping onto the radar. I think, does that answer your question? Is that?
Yes, it does. I mean, I can see that there may be difficulties in terms of attribution. And I suppose that's my question, is if we're dealing with a breakdown of trust and someone who feels that their symptoms are because of mesh and they're seeing a doctor who's saying, well, actually, no, they're not. I think I can see that there may be issues around that.
Yes, well, that is the existing problem.
Yes.
Now, what I'm saying is, if the system wants women to start to heal and start to trust their medical system, then they could write is highly likely, is likely, is less likely. They could use a framework that, if somebody says I've got chicken pox, will you say, well, it's unlikely to be related to mesh, or it's impossible that it's related to mesh. But if somebody says I can't walk, and the further I walk, the shorter my stride gets, well, I would say that would be definitely related to a transobturator tape injury. So I don't think that doctors, I understand that the attribution can be difficult, but they can't sit on the fence for the rest of their lives in case a patient sues them. This is the reality of it. What's the point in having a patient record or a medical record if it's written as a defence for a lawyer in a court? How does that serve the patient, who maybe will never sue the doctor and who will never get the treatment they want because nobody knows what's going on with their bodies? And the doctors who have a very good idea what's going on are not putting it down on paper. And how does that affect women's mental health? Why are women suicidal? They're suicidal not just because they don't have access to patients, they're suicidal because they've been told for years that they're nut jobs. They come out of surgeries thinking they're nut jobs. They come out of disability assessments thinking they're nut jobs because nobody believes. And that is, I don't usually use that language, but that's when we're having a cup of tea with each other, when we go down and support each other, and we go into the coffee room. That is the conversation we have. Did you see the looks on their faces? Did you see the way they were looking at us? Did you see the way they wouldn't acknowledge this? I still encounter that. I still encounter it. And it has to stop. So,
So Mary, is that the last of your recommendations?
There's one more.
All right. Shall we go for that?
We'll go for that. That's why I started. Starting at the top. The public and private divide.
Sorry, public and
Public
private.
and private divide. So, I have to declare an interest because I've switched between systems, and there would be a legal argument as to whether I'm in a no man's land at some point in the system, because the doctor switched between systems. I was operated in a private system. I did my pre-ops in the public hospital. Yeah. So from a legal point of view, it's difficult. But I noticed in correspondence or press release or parliamentary speech, I can't remember the source now, but there is a differentiation in the patient who has accessed private services. I would go back to the human rights point of view. The mesh journey is a long journey for a lot of women. They may have started off in work with extra private health insurance, and they have shifted the burden from the public system by having insurance to pay for. So for every woman that gets a private operation, there's an OR slot for a public patient. The doctors operate both on the public and private services, most of them. I know there are exceptions, but most of them do. So the divide is very blurred because you can cherry pick from both systems if you don't want to be accountable for one or the other. So if the government is going to help people, the fundamental question is, should it make a difference whether the women were operated on in the private or public sector? Because the government encourages private insurance, encourages wait lists to be dealt with through private health centres, and there's a lot of furore about the new London private mesh services clinic. So is it fair that if you are at a point in time you're in a public system and you're on a long wait list, and then public money is decided to be spent on commissioning services from the private healthcare system, and you could operate in the private healthcare system, but if anything happens to you, you're still under the liability of the public healthcare system because it's like a vicarious type of liability. But if you work and you pay privately for insurance and you're operated on the private system, and then you're mesh injured, and then you can't work, and then you can't afford private insurance, and then you filter back into the public healthcare system, and you're a public patient, is the government any less responsible for you? Is the government any, as a public authority? The public authorities use the private system. Our employment system encourages employers to have private insurance. I mean, surely to goodness it must be a case of all these activities are insurance underwritten.
Are you, sorry,
Yeah.
When you say are the government less responsible?
Yes.
Are you meaning in terms of your sort of provision of healthcare, or in terms of potential compensation?
I don't think don't think they're showing any less responsibility in terms of healthcare, because I have experienced that myself. If you don't have private insurance, you can go to your national health system. I'm thinking in terms of any form of redress,
Right,
yes,
okay.
and compensation. I mean, we've had the Bristol Hospital scandal with the retropexy mesh, and there's Spire Hospital, and there's patients public and private. And the private patients have had great difficulties accessing justice in the same way as the public patients. And the question is, if we want to move on and that the women are injured the same way whether they were operated public or private, and they haven't done anything wrong, they're operated on by doctors who are sanctioned by the government departments and standards of care procedures. The women haven't done anything wrong. So why, if the government does a compensation scheme, I don't know what they're planning on doing, or why should it make a difference that the woman was operated on in the private system? I don't think there's a good argument for it apart from an accountant's spreadsheet. That it's less money to pay out if you could exclude a group of patients on the basis of where they got their mesh implant. It comes down to pounds, shillings and pence, doesn't it? You're looking at big numbers and thinking, how can we limit the numbers here? And the other thing I would like to, in that the public-private divide, it's a legal aid. Legal aid is not generally available to people for many things, and there's a question whether this type of injury should attract maybe legal aid. That's I'll just put that in there. So I think that those are my. I'm sure I'm nearly up on time, am I? So all the slides after that, they'll go with me back to Belfast. But I didn't think it appropriate to comment in particular on any one person, because there's mistakes in systems and systems have to be repaired. And a lot of people are very focused at the micro level of this, of the micro impact. When I go home, it's my micro impact. But I think the role of patient advocates as well is to try to understand the system, and I have the knowledge. I've received funding for a lot of my degrees, so one of the reasons I've been involved in this is that I thought I had to step up and try and work my way through the system to help other people. So I'm not a brand, or I don't want to be associated with mesh for the rest of my life. I'd like to get back into my ordinary life, as most women do. But there's a lot of hurt out there, a lot of very, very hurt people.
Well, Mary, thank you so much. It's been really useful. Thank you for the enormous amount of thought you've put into this. And I think your recommendations are things that we will want to consider very carefully and think about the way forward. And of course, I can't say to you, I can't give you any definitive answers today, but just to thank you very much. Looking at it from a policy point of view has been really useful, and certainly know the interaction you've had with a lot of the women who have suffered, as we have. And it is shocking, it is terrible what's happened to people's lives. But this sort of rigour that you've brought, the academic rigour, has been extremely helpful. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.